Her son-in-law told her to get a job or get out while sipping coffee she'd paid for. Edith Monroe didn't argue, she just folded the napkin in her lap. By week's end he'd be fired from a company he didn't know she co-owned. The boardroom would echo with his name right before they erased it. She'd spent decades building in silence. Now silence was her signature move, and when he demanded to know who authorized this, she would smile and say, "Wait, before we go any further, I gotta ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe." The smell of burned toast clung to the air as morning sunlight spilled across the linoleum floor. Edith Monroe stood by the kitchen window, slowly peeling the foil from a teabag like it was some ancient ritual. She moved deliberately, each gesture practiced from decades of muscle memory, but now slowed by the faint tremor in her left hand. The kitchen door swung open harder than necessary. Troy's heavy boots thudded across the floor like he owned every tile. "There it is again," he muttered with a shake of his head. The freeload shuffle. Edith didn't flinch. She stirred her tea. Troy grabbed a protein bar from the counter and yanked open the fridge, rattling condiments. "You know, it wouldn't kill you to get out of the house, maybe find something productive to do with your day. A job, a hobby that pays. Hell, even dog walking brings in something." Jenna's voice floated in like fog from the hallway. "Troy," he snorted. "What?" "We're already carrying the whole house on one paycheck while she watches daytime TV and rearranges canned beans." Edith set her spoon down with a soft clink. She turned slowly, looking at Troy for a fraction of a second, just enough for him to see the clarity in her eyes. Then she walked past him, silent. Troy huffed, "See what I mean?" Jenna stood at the edge of the living room in her scrubs, her half-buttoned jacket in hand. Her mouth opened slightly like she wanted to speak but couldn't choose a side. She gave a nervous laugh that didn't quite land. "She's just adjusting still." "To what?" "Retirement. It's been 5 years. Recovery," Jenna said, voice barely audible. Troy popped the top on his energy drink. "Whatever." Outside, the air was already hot and humid. Summer in Charlotte crept in before breakfast and stayed well past supper. Edith shuffled down the walkway, her cane ticking softly against the concrete. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. Sprinklers coughed to life across the street. She reached the black metal mailbox at the curb, unlatched the creaking door and pulled out the small stack of envelopes. Most were junk supermarket coupons, a circular from some home alarm company. Then she saw it, a thick envelope with the understated elegance of real wealth, ivory stock, serif font, no window. She opened it there, on the sidewalk. Her eyes scanned the page with calm precision. Dividend disbursement notice. ISR, Bell and Horizon Logistics, distribution quarterly. Trust holder, Monroe Holdings, LLC, net transfer 68. She folded the letter neatly and slipped it back into the envelope. No change in expression, no rush in her step. Behind her, the front door slammed shut as Troy peeled out of the driveway in his black pickup, the engine coughing like it had something to prove. Edith waited for the noise to fade before turning back toward the house. The cicadas were beginning to scream from the tree. Somewhere a neighbor's wind chimes started to sway. As she reached the porch, Jenna opened the door for her. "Mom, you okay?" "I'm fine," Edith said, brushing past. Was he too harsh again? Edith looked at her daughter, took in the worry behind her eyes, the exhaustion in her posture, and simply said, "You should get to work." Jenna hesitated. "We can talk when I get back." Edith offered a soft smile, the kind that said, "I've seen too much to waste words." She disappeared down the hall, envelope still in hand. Inside her bedroom, the air was still. She closed the door, sat at her desk, and slid the dividend statement into a lockbox with dozens of others, all organized, all current. The key clicked shut. She stared at the box for a long moment, then reached for her laptop. Not to surf the internet, not to watch a show, but to check a dashboard. Only a few people in North Carolina even knew existed. Bell and Horizon shareholder portal, access level executive trust beneficiary. Last login 3 weeks ago. She didn't type anything. She just stared at the screen and whispered, "Time." Her phone buzzed once. A text from Marcus Bell. "You in town? I've got something you might want to see." Edith didn't reply. She just reached for her The Bell and Horizon Logistics building didn't look like much from the street. A repurposed textile mill with exposed brick and matte black accents. It sat tucked behind a strip of car dealerships on the outskirts of Charlotte, the kind of place you'd drive by 100 times and never think to enter. But Edith Monroe walked through its glass doors like she never left. "Ms. Monroe," said the young receptionist, standing before she finished saying the name, "Mr. Bell is expecting you." She nodded once and didn't break stride. The cane tapped in perfect rhythm as she moved through the wide lobby, now filled with sleek furniture and framed company milestones. She barely glanced at the wall of smiling team photos, none of them had her in it. The elevator opened directly into the executive suite. Marcus Bell stood waiting, hands clasped, a grin tugging at the corners of his mouth like he was trying and failing not to look proud. "Edith," he said, voice warm and reverent, "you still make silence louder than most folks make noise." He moved to hug her, but she extended a hand instead. He took it with both of his, giving a subtle deferential squeeze. "You've redecorated," she said, glancing around at the polished floors and glass-partitioned offices, "and yet somehow it still smells like the old shipping bay." She smiled faintly. "Good, that's the smell of grit." He gestured down the hall. "Come on, let me show you what you helped build." They walked slowly, not because she needed to, not entirely, because some moments deserved to The hallway curved, opening into a modern operations floor filled with teams murmuring around giant monitors. Young professionals in sharp-collared shirts clicked away at keyboard. Edith's eyes scanned everything with surgical precision. New tech, better workflow, expanded departments, but her expression stayed unreadable. "You remember how broke we were the first year?" Marcus asked, "running payroll off a personal checking account, eating peanut butter sandwiches on the shipping dock." "You had energy," she replied, "but no systems, and you gave me both." He paused. "You gave me your entire retirement." She didn't answer. She didn't have to. He knew. They stopped in front of a door labeled Logistics Strategy, T. Cartwright. Marcus gave her a sidelong glance. "That's him." Edith peered through the small window. Inside, Troy stood in front of a whiteboard, blustering about quarterly distribution models to two overworked analysts. His voice carried, overconfident, and too loud for the small room. "He thinks he's running the place," Marcus said. Edith turned away. "He's playing house with something that was built with blood." "You want him gone?" Marcus asked quietly. She exhaled, measured and slow. "I want to see if he knows what house he's playing in." Marcus nodded, leading her into a quiet boardroom at the end of the hallway. The room was minimalist. Oval table, leather chairs, a wall of digital displays showing logistics chains in motion. In the center of the table sat a leather folder marked Shareholder Reports, Q2. She opened it. Inside were figures she already knew by heart. Her holdings, carefully divided across blind trusts and shell LLCs, now amounted to 27% of Bell and Horizon stock, second largest stakeholders, and no one in that building had a clue, except Marcus. He leaned against the windowsill. "You want to come see your kingdom?" She closed the folder and rested her hand on top of it. "I already have." They sat for a moment in companionable silence. Then a voice came faintly from down the hall. Troy again, bragging, laughing at his own joke. Marcus rolled his eyes. "He doesn't even know who signed the policies he abuses." Edith tilted her head. "Good, let him keep thinking no one's watching." Marcus reached for the phone on the table, thumb hovering over a button. "Say the word, Edith." She didn't respond, but her eyes drifted back to the hallway. Then calmly, "No, not yet." The HR suite smelled faintly of citrus and old printer paper. Edith sat in a soft-backed chair, hands folded over her cane, as Camille slid a manila folder across the glass-top table. "No introductions, no pleasantries. Just truth." "Started small," Camille said. "Late reports, passive-aggressive email, backdated approvals he swore he had verbal clearance for." Edith didn't touch the folder, she just watched Camille's eyes. The HR director flipped it open anyway. Then it got worse. Inside were printouts, one highlighted in yellow, another circled in red ink. "Exit interview, anonymous complaints." A screenshot of an internal chat where Troy referred to an older employee as dead weight with arthritis. 3 staff members quit outright in the last quarter, Camille said. 2 more transferred. We had to reassign a top billing analyst just to stop the hemorrhaging. Did he retaliate? Edith asked, voice calm as water. Camille nodded. One analyst reported being iced out of meetings after speaking up. No paper trail, but we know the pattern. Edith's fingers grazed the edge of the folder. Did Marcus see this? He has now, Camille said. But he waited, because he knew you'd want the full picture first. Edith took a moment, absorbing it all in silence. Then she gestured toward the wall-mounted TV screen in the room. I want to see how he performs when he doesn't know he's being watched. Camille smiled. A thin, professional line, already queued up. A few keystrokes later, a Zoom window blinked to life on the screen. The digital meeting was labeled Weekly Ops Sync, East Division. Edith's name was listed as EM. Observer. Troy appeared dead center, square-jawed in a fitted shirt, talking over everyone like he was auditioning for a TED Talk. The gallery view showed 9 other employees, all on mute, some taking notes, some clearly checked out. So, let me walk you through this restructuring, Troy said, drawing a crude diagram on a digital whiteboard. I consolidated the freight logic chain to eliminate redundant tracking approvals, streamlined the authorization queue, cut turnaround by 3. Edith leaned slightly forward. I built the policy myself, he added, modeled it off a white paper I read back in grad school. Camille side-eyed the screen. Grad school, huh? Edith's lips barely moved. Play the next slide. Camille clicked. A PDF came up, the policy in question. Edith's initials sat at the bottom of the original draft, dated 7 years ago. Policy John 27, T. Time-sensitive freight logic and redundancy reduction, a framework she designed, deployed, taught. Troy had just repackaged it with a color-coded chart and a bigger font. Edith tilted her head. There it is. What do you want to do? Camille asked. The Zoom meeting ended. One by one, the little rectangles disappeared until Troy was alone on screen, still talking, unaware he'd been left behind. The irony lingered. I want his ego to finish the job, Edith said. If we move too soon, it'll look personal. I want him to look like the architect of his own collapse. Camille nodded. So we let him keep building until he steps off the edge. Edith looked out the floor-to-ceiling window. Charlotte's skyline shimmered behind distant heat waves. Let's tighten the screws first. Just then, Marcus entered the room, a travel mug in one hand and a raised brow. How bad? Camille handed him the folder. He's a walking liability with a whiteboard. Marcus flipped through the pages, then looked at Edith. Still want to play the long game? Edith didn't blink. The longer the drop, the louder the fall. The email hit Troy's inbox at 7:03 a.m. on a Tuesday. Subject: Internal Compliance Audit, East Logistics Division, from Camille H., HR Director, CC Finance. Internal review. He stared at it blankly, then reread it, twice. By 9, Camille and a stone-faced financial analyst, named Lex Alvarez, were walking the floor of Troy's department. No warning, no preamble, just clipboards, polite nods, and quiet questions that made everyone sit a little straight. Can you pull the load reconciliation reports from April through June? Camille asked one manager. Troy appeared at her side before the manager could respond. Is there a problem? He asked, forcing a casual smile. Camille didn't look up from her notes. Just a routine audit happens when operational margins shift. Troy's smile wavered. No one told me this was scheduled. Lex finally spoke. Because it wasn't. They moved on, their pens scratching as they went. By noon, the bullpen had gone silent. Desktops clicked. Keyboards barely dared to clatter. Troy bounced between desks, whispering instructions, trying to maintain calm without sounding like he was spiraling, but everyone saw it. The twitch in his jaw, the new line of sweat under his collar. Camille asked for procurement logs. Lex requested freight delay justification. They opened folder after folder, only to find conflicting timestamps, duplicated files, even entire weeks of data backed up with nothing but Troy's initials and vague language, like adjusted due to operational discretion. By 3:00 p.m. a junior associate raised a hand. I think one of the invoices from May was submitted twice, different amounts. Troy practically lunged toward the desk. It's a placeholder, I flagged it already. Camille didn't react, just wrote something in the margin of her report. That evening, the kitchen smelled like sautéed spinach and roasted garlic. Edith stood at the counter, chopping slowly with her good hand while the news murmured in the background. Jenna came in from work, kicked off her shoes and dropped her bag by the wall. She looked tired. The kind of tired that sank into your shoulders and stayed there. "He's on edge," she said, reaching for a glass. "Something about a surprise compliance check at work. Says it's just HR making noise. But I can tell it's more than that." Edith scraped garlic into the skillet. The sizzle filled the silence. "He said he might need to work late tomorrow," Jenna added. "You think they're in trouble?" Edith stirred the pan. "Do you?" Jenna hesitated. "I don't know, he's usually cocky. But today he was like he knew something was coming and hoped it wouldn't." Edith didn't look up. "Worry needs a reason, or it's just noise." Jenna blinked. "That's cryptic." "It's seasoning," Edith replied. They both chuckled. And for a moment, the kitchen soft. After dinner, Jenna curled up on the couch with a blanket and a true crime documentary. Edith washed the dishes quietly, dried her hands and disappeared down the hall. In her room, the air was cool and still. The small desk lamp cast a low amber glow over her writing table. She opened the laptop and waited for the familiar hum of startup. She didn't check the weather, didn't scroll the news. She went straight to a bookmarked port. Bell & Horizon executive shareholder, Monroe Holdings Trust, verified identity, two-factor code sent. She entered the code from her phone. The dashboard loaded. Graphs, reports, audit logs, active compliance thread. She clicked into the open audit. OD Theft 1322 Division Oversight Review T. Cartwright. A status bar marked live. Active monitoring. Camille's initials appeared next to every uploaded report. Lex's summaries follow. Then, a folder popped open with a new subheading, Regularities, pending legal review. Edith leaned back slightly in her chair, one finger resting gently on her chin. At the top of the screen, a new message appeared in real time. Lex A. Halloran, we're starting to see evidence of willful manipulation, may need to escalate. She read it once, then clicked mark as watched and closed the laptop without a word. The boardroom sat in a hush of polished mahogany and sound-dampened carpet, stillness wrapped in corporate gloss. The kind of room where decisions didn't echo, they rippled. Edith Monroe arrived 20 minutes early, as she always had when the stakes were real. Camille was already there, arranging printouts into tidy stacks, highlighter uncapped and ready. Marcus stood near the digital display wall, arms folded, a tablet in one hand. "You're early," he said, though it sounded more like a compliment than an observation. "Punctuality was the first standard I ever set," Edith replied, easing into the chair at the head of the table, not because anyone offered it, but because it had always been hers, whether anyone knew it or not. Camille slid a folder toward her. Final audit summary, 3 policy breaches, 2 financial misstatements, 1 altered timestamp that Lex traced to Troy's own credentials. Edith didn't open it. She looked at Marcus. "How many board members are joining?" "Just the audit subcommittee today," he said. 3 voting members, enough to make it formal. Edith gave a single nod. "Good." Footsteps echoed in the hallway. Marcus glanced toward the door. "Let's see if he shows with his usual flair." The door opened with a practiced swing, confident, maybe even a little performative. Troy strode in, holding a leather notebook and his go-to smirk. Then he saw her. For the first time in months, the words didn't come easily. "Edith, what?" He looked at Marcus, then Camille, then back to Edith. His voice climbed a half octave. "What is this?" Marcus gestured toward the chair opposite Edith. "Troy, have a seat. We're just waiting on the committee." Troy didn't sit. "Why is she here?" "She's here," Marcus said, "because she holds 27% of the company." That made him blink. Marcus let it settle. "Meet our executive shareholder." Camille added softly, "She's here to observe." The door opened again. 3 more entered, all mid-level board members with quiet power. They offered handshakes, made small talk. Troy stood frozen, gripping the back of his chair like it might anchor him to the room. The meeting began. Marcus took the lead. "We're here to review recent findings tied to operational discrepancies in the East Logistics Division." Camille took over seamlessly. Flipping to the first report, our audit found repeated instances of unauthorized file edits, misrepresented expense justifications, and procedural breaches around vendor routing. Troy tried to interrupt. There were system lags. Those weren't. She raised a hand. You'll have time to respond. Lex's voice played from a recorded call, flat and professional. These edits weren't clerical, they were calculated, patterned, coordinated. The board members took notes. One leaned forward. Mr. Cartwright, can you speak to these adjustments made under your credential, particularly the timestamp reversals? Troy looked at Marcus. You're letting this happen? Marcus didn't answer. Troy's eyes darted to Edith. You've been behind this. Edith lifted her eyes, slow and deliberate. He told me to get a job, she said evenly. So I came to get mine back. The silence cracked across the room like ice. One board member murmured, "Excuse me, what exactly is your role?" Marcus answered for her. Ms. Monroe is a founding investor, former operations lead, and the second largest stakeholder in this company. Everything you're sitting in, standing on and profiting from, she helped build it. Troy swallowed hard. You've been watching me? No, Edith said. I've been listening. You're the one who made yourself seen. The air in the room shifted. The confidence drained from Troy's posture, replaced by something tighter, smaller. He sank into the chair across from her, suddenly unsure of what to say or whether anything he said would matter. Camille clicked her pen. We'll continue with line item specifics now if that's all right. No one objected. The HR hallway always smelled faintly of toner and recycled ambition. Today it smelled like consequence. Troy sat stiffly outside Camille's office, arms crossed, one leg jittering beneath him like a ticking bomb. The door opened and Marcus stepped out, his expression unreadable. Come in. Troy followed, trying to lead with authority, but the posture was off. His balance was all elbows and too much breath. Camille sat behind her desk, tablet in hand, lips pressed in a neutral line. Marcus didn't sit. He stood by the blinds, gazing out like someone studying the weather before a storm. Camille started it. Mr. Cartwright, based on preliminary findings from the audit, and pending further legal review, your access to operational systems has been suspended. What? You will be on paid leave effective immediately, she continued. You are not to contact your team or enter the premises without written authorization. Troy blinked. This isn't disciplinary. You don't have cause. Marcus finally turned. We have enough for pause. Which is all this is. For now. Troy opened his mouth to fight, but nothing came. Instead he let out a hollow laugh, then stormed out without another word. Marcus watched him disappear down the hallway, then looked at Camille. Keep feeding him rope. Camille didn't smile, but her eyes sparkled. Steam curled upward as she added a shake of cayenne, stirred and let it simmer. Jenna walked in, changed out of her scrubs, face flushed from the heat. What smells so good? Dinner, Edith said. You've been skipping meals. Jenna chuckled. Troy's been eating out a lot lately. Says work's too crazy to come home on time. Edith wiped her hands and turned. You ever think about going back part-time? Jenna hesitated. At the clinic? No, Edith said softly. Something lighter. Logistics, maybe. Back office. Something to remind you you're still sharp. Jenna looked at her, surprised. You think I could do that? I know you can. Jenna pulled out a chair. There's an assistant admin job. Marcus mentioned months ago. Said it might open back up. Edith ladled chili into bowls. You should follow up. Jenna smiled. Small and unsure. I'll call HR tomorrow. Across town, Troy sat in his truck in a dark parking lot, the dashlight glowing harsh on his face. His phone buzzed with unread emails, audit notes, HR contacts, compliance protocol. He scrolled past them and opened Camille's contact, text message, 8:41 p.m. You think this is over? You think you can spin this like it's me? Watch yourself. Another 8:42 p.m. Tell Marcus I've got dirt too. I don't go down alone. He stared at the screen, knuckles white around the wheel, then dropped the phone in the passenger seat. The silence clawed at him. The next evening, dinner returned to tradition. Edith hosted with practiced ease, cornbread, collard greens, a pecan pie cooling by the window. Jenna was more talkative, asking questions about recipes and humming along to the jazz station. Edith liked low in the background. There were no loud words, no shouting, just calm, controlled, curated, and in that peace, something shifted. Edith asked Jenna to say grace. The words were quiet, steady, and for the first time in weeks, spoken without apology. Afterward, as they cleared the table, Jenna asked, "Do you think he's okay?" Edith placed the last glass in the dishwasher. "He's figuring out how heavy his name feels without a desk to hide behind." The AC hummed low as morning light crept across the kitchen tile. Jenna sat at the table in her robe, hair wet from the shower, coffee cooling untouched by her elbow. Her eyes stayed fixed on the open envelope in front of her, a utility bill printed in red. "I swear the power bill used to be 100 less," she said, rubbing her forehead. "And the mortgage." It jumped again. Edith stood at the stove, flipping eggs with the quiet rhythm of someone trained to keep motion calm, not casual. "Rates adjust." "Yeah, well, everything's adjusting except the paycheck." Jenna gave a tired laugh. "We're not behind, but we're definitely tight." Edith plated the eggs, set them on the table, and poured her own tea. She didn't comment. "Not yet." Jenna glanced up. "Sorry, I'm just feeling the stretch more lately." "You should." Jenna blinked. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means maybe it's time you knew who's been holding the other end of the rope." Later that afternoon, Edith sat at her bedroom desk, her reading glasses perched low on her nose, a paper ledger open beside her laptop. It was old school, dates in one column, annotations in the other, each line marked in her neat, looping handwriting. She navigated to her online banking portal. 2 clicks, one joint account, Jenna's name on it. Buried beneath grocery charges and pay stub deposits were quarterly payments. Every January, April, July, and October. Line item, Mecklenburg County property tax paid. Routing source, Monroe Holdings LLC. Deposited through Joint Household Reserve. J. Cartwright, E. Monroe. Not anonymous exactly, just quiet. She clicked through to the latest tax file. The deed hadn't changed names in years, but the payer of record had. 5 years ago, right after the stroke. She picked up the phone. "Daryl, bring the real tea set. I'm done waiting." He walked in like a man who knew he'd been expected. Trim gray suit, worn leather briefcase, and the permanent squint of someone who didn't waste time on small print. They sat on the screened-in porch, a pot of Earl Grey steaming between them. He asked, flipping through the folder she handed him. "I've been paying to keep his feet dry long enough." He gave a grunt of approval and started scribbling notes. "I want the lien reversal filed quietly," she added. "No flags, no calls, just the paper trail set straight. I'll refile the deed notice, tie it to Monroe Holdings, and have it routed to Jenna's email as a standard notification. No noise, just facts." Edith sipped her tea. "She'll see it when she's meant to." 3 days later, Jenna stood in the hallway, mail in one hand, a puzzled look on her face. "Did you get something from the county too?" Edith didn't look up from her crossword. "Why?" "This notice," Jenna frowned, reading it aloud. "Updated deed recording confirmation. Primary property holder, Monroe Holdings LLC." She paused. "What is this?" Edith folded the paper in her lap. "You've been living in my house, Jenna." Jenna blinked. "But I thought when Dad died, I kept the deed in trust," Edith said calmly. "Troy didn't know. He assumed. And I let him." Sometimes letting someone feel in control is the most efficient way to expose their cracks. Jenna stared at the notice again, then back to her mother. "Why now?" Edith rose from her chair, walking to the window. "Because I've been erasing illusions, one room at a time." The message came in at 2:12 a.m. Edith didn't hear the phone buzz. She'd been asleep for nearly 3 hours. The bedroom window cracked just enough to let in the distant hum of crickets and the cooling whisper of night air. But in the morning, as she sipped her tea and thumbed through the news, the notification waited. One missed call, one voicemail, from T. Cartwright. She stared at it a long moment before pressing play. The message opened mid-breath, angry, unhinged. "You think you're so clever, hiding in plain sight like some goddamn ghost. playing puppet master while pretending to bake casseroles. You've always been a manipulator, Edith. A liar with a cane and a grudge. And now, you're just an old wreck trying to stay relevant. There was a pause, the kind filled with heat and acid. You want to tear me down? Fine. But don't act like you didn't set this all in motion years ago. You're no victim, you're just bitter. Everyone sees through it. They just don't say it out loud. The message ended with a sharp, breathy silence. Edith set the phone down, didn't react, didn't even blink. Instead, she opened her laptop, clicked into her email, and forwarded the audio file to Camille with a single-line message. HR log. Harassment of executive leadership. 10 minutes later, her phone lit up. Camille H. Logged. Time-stamped. Copied to legal. You want Marcus to call him? Edith responded without punctuation. Yes. He didn't look at the phone in his hand, just listened. I don't care how emotional he is, he said quietly. He left a digital threat to a shareholder. That's policy. Period. He paused, listening. No. Tell him to call his lawyer. He doesn't get another HR meeting. He gets a statement of intent and a timestamp. Click. He ended the call and slid the phone into his pocket. Behind him, Camille spoke. Think he's scared yet? Marcus shook his head. He's cornered. Big diff. That evening, Edith sat in her study, legal documents spread out on the table in front of her. A black leather portfolio sat open beside her. Her will, updated 2 years ago after her minor stroke. It was neat, sensible, but no longer sufficient. She pulled out a red pen. Names changed. Trust allocations updated. New clauses added. 50% to Jenna's retirement fund, 10% to Women's Logistics Education Initiative, and a new codicil, handwritten with care. In the event of any future dispute over estate clarity, the recorded history of all holdings shall be considered final and absolute. When she finished, she slid the papers into a manila envelope and sealed it shut with deliberate hands. Jenna found her there an hour later. Mom, you've been in here a while. Edith looked up. Just sorting things. Jenna stepped inside, gaze drifting to the documents. Your will? Edith gave a small nod. It was overdue. Jenna sat down slowly. Why now? There was a pause. Then Jenna asked, softer this time, did you start all this? Edith looked at her, really looked at her. I finished what he started. Silence settled between them, not cold, not angry, just honest. Jenna nodded. Once. Okay. She stood, kissed her mother's forehead, and left the room without another word. Troy's hands tightened around the steering wheel as he pulled into the Bell and Horizon parking lot. His breath fogged the windshield even though the AC was on full blast. The call from Camille had been short. Please report to HR by 10 a.m., but everything in the tone said final. No one greeted him at the front desk. The receptionist glanced at him and quickly looked away. Camille was already waiting outside her office, clipboard in hand, lips pursed with professionalism, so airtight it was nearly hostile. Mr. Cartwright, she said, voice clipped. Come in. He stepped inside. The blinds were drawn. A security guard stood by the far wall, arms folded, not aggressive, just present. Enough. Marcus sat at the table, quiet, elbows on the armrest of a leather chair. He didn't stand. Camille closed the door. Troy dropped his bag onto the floor and forced a grin. This feels formal. Camille didn't smile. It is. She clicked her pen once and began reading, following a full review of the audit findings, as well as documented violations of internal conduct, policy falsifications, and confirmed harassment of executive leadership. Bell and Horizon Logistics hereby terminates your employment effective immediately. Troy blinked. You're joking. No.
Don't even. This wasn't all me.
Marcus cut in, calm and razor sharp. It was enough of you. Troy stood, voice rising. You're siding with her? That's what this is? Edith's little revenge party? Camille didn't respond. Marcus leaned back. You didn't just break protocol, you broke trust. You burned through staff, faked numbers, and then left a voicemail that might as well have been a confession. If you're looking for someone to blame, start with your reflection. Troy's mouth opened, then closed again. Camille slid a thin stack of papers across the table. This is your termination letter, with full documentation and severance details. Legal has already reviewed it. You can sign or have your counsel contest. Either way, you are no longer authorized to represent or access any systems, personnel, or data as of now. He didn't move. The security guard stepped slightly forward. Camille added, cool as ice. Your personal effects have been boxed and are waiting with reception. They will be escorted to your vehicle. Troy looked at Marcus, waiting for something. Hesitation, guilt, doubt. He got none. Then his eyes landed on the signature line at the bottom of the termination form. Approved by proxy. Edith Monroe, executive shareholder. His face went pale. You're letting her do this? No, Marcus said. She's not doing this. You are. Troy's breath caught in his throat. This company survived without you before, Marcus said, and it'll thrive without you after. Troy's hand hovered over the termination form. Then he shoved it away. Have it delivered to my lawyer. Gladly, Camille said. The security guard opened the door. Troy turned in a slow circle, as if expecting someone to intervene, someone to say he still mattered. No one did. Just her, a cup of tea, and the same form now slid quietly in front of her by Camille. She read it without blinking, signed it with the same calm hand she used for thank you notes and grocery lists. Marcus leaned against the doorway, arms folded. You never even raised your voice, he said. I didn't have to, Edith replied. He was already shouting. Camille returned with a manila folder. It's done, she said. Final copy goes to legal, HR, and the board. Edith stood slowly. Thank you. As she walked out, Marcus called after her. How'd that feel? She didn't stop. Like closing a file drawer that's been stuck open too long. The late August evening stretched long across the backyard, the sky a soft violet haze threaded with gold as the sun dipped behind the pines. Midsummer heat clung to the porch railings, but the worst of it had broken. A soft breeze rustled the paper napkins on the table, and the smell of rosemary and roasted garlic drifted gently from the open kitchen window. Edith moved with quiet purpose, setting down a tray of glazed chicken thighs on the outdoor dining table she had polished that morning. The table, a solid wood rectangle she'd bought 20 years ago with her first operations bonus, now held bowls of herbed potatoes, sweet corn succotash, and a pitcher of sweet tea glistening with condensation. She adjusted one of the serving spoons slightly, more out of instinct than need. Jenna stood just inside the screen door, brushing a wisp of hair off her forehead as she called out, Okay, come on y'all. Everything's ready. Moments later, the back door creaked open and 3 women stepped out, all in office casual wear still wrinkled from the day. Jenna's co-workers, Elise from billing, Natalie from procurement, and Marcy from scheduling, greeted Edith with warm smiles and murmured appreciation as they found their seats. The table filled with the soft clinking of forks, folding chairs scraping gently against the concrete patio, and the mellow hum of easy conversation. For the first few minutes the women kept to work talk. Someone mentioned a new vendor policy that didn't make sense. Another laughed about accidentally replying all to a company-wide email. Jenna chimed in now and then, her voice relaxed, the stiffness that had shadowed her for months gone from her shoulder. But what hung over the table was what no one said. There was no chair for Troy, no mention of his name, no awkward sideways glance toward the empty place he used to occupy like he owned the space. His absence wasn't a subject, they simply moved on without him, as if their shared silence had voted unanimously that the chapter was closed. At one point Elise leaned over to Edith and said, I've got to tell you, I wasn't expecting a dinner like this, thought it was going to be takeout and paper plates. Edith smiled, not boastfully but with a settled kind of confidence. Hospitality doesn't need occasion, she said. It just needs the right people to show up. Laughter followed. Real, soft laughter, not the brittle kind that fills space when things are too tight to breathe. The food was passed around again, more tea poured, and as the light dimmed further, someone lit the small citronella candle at the center of the table, casting everyone's faces in amber glow. As they finished their plates and settled into that quiet lull that follows a good meal, Jenna looked over at her mother with a smile that held both affection and curiosity. Mom, when did you learn to cook like this? I don't remember you doing full spreads like this when I was little. Edith tilted her head. pretending to think. Back when no one believed I could do more than keep the coffee pot warm in a shipping office, I used to bring lunches to team meetings, just so they'd stay in the room long enough to hear the ideas I'd spent nights working through. Elise leaned forward. Did they listen? Edith looked down at her cup for a moment. Eventually, after a few forecasts proved true, and a few senior managers realized I could save them more money than they were wasting. There was a quiet pause, not heavy, just filled with a kind of reverent reflection. Jenna studied her mother carefully, something unreadable passing over her face. Maybe it was admiration, or something closer to realization. Either way, the look lingered. In that moment, she didn't see the woman who folded laundry in silence, or shuffled through grocery lists by hand. She saw the architect of a career, the spine behind a legacy, the voice that had never needed to shout to be heard. Her phone buzzed once in her lap. She glanced at the screen, then again. The message was short. Camille HR case closed. Final record sealed. Blacklisted across the network. Not a door left open to knock on. Jenna didn't respond. She simply locked her phone, slid it face down on the table and turned back to her mother, who had resumed pouring coffee into mismatched porcelain mugs. The warmth on Jenna's face wasn't just from the candlelight anymore. The knock came just after. Jenna had just finished loading the dishwasher when she heard it, sharp, uneven, like someone was knocking with more frustration than intent. She glanced at the clock on the oven, then at Edith, who sat at the kitchen table nursing a mug of black coffee. Neither of them moved at first. Then it came again, harder. "I'll get it," Jenna said, drying her hands on a towel. When she opened the door, Troy stood on the porch, disheveled and twitching with agitation. His shirt was wrinkled, collar slightly stained, and his eyes were red, either from lack of sleep or something stronger. He didn't wait for an invitation. "You blocked my number," he demanded as he stepped inside, brushing past her. Jenna stepped back, startled but steady. "You shouldn't be here. I live here," he snapped. "Or did that change too while you were sipping tea with your mother and her boardroom pets?" From the kitchen, Edith didn't rise. She didn't even turn around. She took a quiet sip from her cup and stared out the window as if the chaos hadn't entered the room at all. Troy walked in, chest puffed, voice rising with every breath. "You think I don't know what's going on? You think I don't see what this is? A setup? You all had it out for me since day one. She's been playing you, Jenna. You can't see that?" Jenna moved slowly between him and the kitchen, not out of fear but positioning. "I asked you not to come here like this. You really think she's innocent in all this?" he barked, pointing a trembling finger at Edith. "She's been pulling strings behind your back for years, making herself the victim, the savior, the saint, but she's a manipulative old snake, and you're falling for it like a child." Still Edith didn't respond. The silence wrapped around her like a wall. Troy's voice cracked as he turned back to Jenna. "She ruined me. She humiliated me. And now I've got no job, no lawyer who'll call me back, no future in this damn industry, and you're just sitting here like she's some kind of matriarch hero." "You did that to yourself," Jenna said, voice calm but firm, "and you don't get to come into my mother's house and blame her for it." His face contorted, rage battling desperation. "You're choosing her over me. I'm choosing myself," she said, "and it's about." Troy stepped forward, not violent, just close, too close. Jenna didn't flinch, but she didn't back down either. "Go," she said, steady now. "Leave. I won't ask again." Behind her Edith finally stood, slow and deliberate, cane in one hand, her mug in the other. She didn't speak, didn't need to. Her presence alone pulled the air taut. Troy scoffed, letting out a bitter laugh. "You think you've won, huh?" He looked at Edith as though daring her to respond, but she met his gaze with the coolness of someone who had outgrown the need to explain herself. Jenna opened the door behind him. "You need to go now." Something in her tone must have finally registered, because Troy stepped back, slowly, wordlessly. He gave them both a long venomous glare before walking out, and slamming the door behind him hard enough to rattle the picture frame. The silence afterward was heavier than his yelling. Jenna leaned against the counter, hands shaking slightly. "I thought I knew who he was," she said after a moment. Edith returned to her chair, setting her mug down with a soft clink. "You do now," she said. The next morning, Daryl arrived just after sunrise, his car tires whispering across the gravel drive. He carried a leather portfolio tucked under one arm and didn't wait to be invited in. He simply nodded once at Edith, handed her a stack of neatly clipped documents and said, "Filed at 6 this morning. Emergency order, confirmed." Jenna stood at the threshold in her robe, hair still damp from the shower, her eyes wide but resolute. "What is that?" she asked. Edith handed her the top page. At the header it read, "Protective Restraining Order, Mecklenburg County Court, Petitioner Edith Monroe, Subject, Troy Cartwright." Jenna scanned the page in silence. When she finally looked up, her voice barely carried, "He's not who I thought." Edith touched her daughter's shoulder gently. "That's what truth does. It strips away who you hope someone might be. What's left is who they are." The pen moved slowly across the final page. Edith's signature, neat and unwavering, sealed the trust documents that would outlive her. The old leather-bound folder lay open on the kitchen table beside a second cup of cooling tea. Next to it sat Daryl's reading glasses, folded neatly atop the envelope he'd brought that morning, now empty. "You're sure about the percentages?" he asked, scanning the pages one last time. "Yes," Edith replied without hesitation. 60% to the Women in Operations Legacy Fund. They'll know what to do with it better than I ever could." Daryl gave a slight nod of admiration. "It's rare people with that kind of stake let go of control while they're still living." "That's the point," she said. "Letting go with intent beats holding on out of habit." She closed the folder and handed it to him. The matter was finished. 2 days later, the executive suite conference room at Bell and Horizon hummed with the quiet tap of styluses and the low rustle of quarterly reports being flipped. Marcus sat at the head of the table, dark blue tie loosened at the collar, tablet in front of him, but his focus on Jenna, who sat just to his right. "You've earned this," he said, passing her a slim folder with the Bell and Horizon insignia embossed on the cover. "Assistant Director of East Operations. It's already been cleared with the board." Jenna hesitated, then opened the folder. Her name was there, her full name. No hyphen, no attachments. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady but softened by something almost shy. "I didn't think after everything. I didn't know if I should accept." Marcus smiled gently. "You're not standing in his shadow anymore, Jenna. You're standing on your own." Across the room, Camille stood with a stack of onboarding materials tucked under her arm. "We've cleared your access. You'll have your own team, and a seat at the strategy table." Edith stood in the corner of the room, quiet but watchful, leaning slightly on her cane. She hadn't spoken much during the meeting, but her presence had been steady, ground. She met Jenna's gaze across the room and gave a small, proud nod. It said everything, without needing to say anything at all. Later that afternoon, after the board meeting had adjourned and most of the attendees had filtered out into private calls or elevators, Camille remained behind, leaning on the edge of the conference table while Edith gathered her things. "You know," Camille said, casually folding her arms, "if you wanted to make it official, we could do a press release. Something about legacy, reactivation, second acts. You'd be the headline." Edith tucked her pen into her portfolio and fastened the clasp. "No." Camille tilted her head. "You're sure?" Edith looked toward the windows where the afternoon sun gleamed off the side of building. "Let the changes speak. I'm not here to be known. I'm here to be useful." Camille didn't press the matter further. She simply smiled and nodded once before heading out, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. That night, as rain tapped gently against the windows of Edith's study, she sat with her tablet in her lap, reading the latest operations report from Jenna's team. Her glasses slid slightly down her nose, but she didn't bother adjusting them. The numbers were good. The real allocation strategies Marcus had implemented were working. She set the tablet aside and reached for her tea when her inbox pinged. From tcartwright89@gmail.com, subject, "You win. Can we talk?" She stared at the screen for a long time. The message preview showed just enough. "I made mistakes. A lot of them. I need a second chance. Please. Just 5 minutes. I'll do anything." She didn't open the email. She didn't delete it either. She simply archived it quietly without ceremony and returned to her tea. The folding chairs were lined in 2 rows on the polished concrete floor of the local VFW hall, their metal legs scraping occasionally as people shuffled to adjust their view. The air smelled faintly of dust and lemon polish. A simple wooden podium stood near the front, flanked by 2 folding tables dressed in crisp white linen, each holding neat displays of framed certificates, polished tools and a few worn but well-preserved personal effects. Edith sat off to the side, not in the front but close enough to hear everything. She didn't need the spotlight. The room wasn't for her. It was quiet, respectful. No media, no photographers, just a handful of local collectors, a few logistics retirees, and some younger professionals curious about the event, labeled in the community notice as a state auction, personal belongings of Daniel Monroe, former operations specialist, Southeastern Rail and Freight. The auctioneer, a silver-haired man in a navy vest, tapped the gavel lightly against the edge of the table. Next up, he said, we have a walnut display case containing the 209 Southeastern Freight Leadership Award. The plaque reads, Troy Cartwright, Emerging Talent in Logistics Strategy. A few people murmured. A couple lifted paddles but not many. The award didn't carry prestige beyond a company newsletter that hadn't existed in 5 years. From her seat, Edith raised her voice, not loud, but enough to carry. I nominated him for that. Heads turned. The auctioneer hesitated, unsure whether to respond. Edith continued. He didn't know, of course. Back then he was just 2 years into marrying my daughter. Thought he was building something of his own. She stood slowly, walking toward the podium, her cane clicking softly against the waxed floor. I put in the nomination paperwork, wrote the letter, spoke to the board. She looked directly at the award, the brass plate catching the light just enough to reflect back at her. I thought it might give him direction, something to stand on. The room was silent. Edith looked at the auctioneer. Please continue. The bidding resumed, brief, polite. The plaque went for $45 to a middle-aged man in a tan windbreaker. He would later confess to Camille that he only wanted the frame. The rest of the auction moved efficiently. A box of Daniel's service pins, his desk nameplate, a weathered ledger he used to record delivery, all of it catalogued, described and passed along to new owners with calm finality. At the close, a thin envelope was handed to Edith for signature. Inside was the total, just over $3,200. Later that week, Camille included a brief piece in the company's internal newsletter, under the heading Legacy Forward, a quiet gift from the Monroe family. The article was short, no more than 150 words. It mentioned the private estate auction. It detailed how every dollar from the proceeds had been donated to a new scholarship fund, created in Daniel Monroe's name. The Monroe Re-Skill Fund would provide career retraining for displaced mid-career logistics workers, men and women who, like Edith once had, found themselves at a crossroads and needed a second chance. The photo included was small and dignified, a folded flag, a freight pin and a plaque. Troy's plaque, sitting in a donation box marked, to be reused. Jenna read the article on a quiet Thursday afternoon while waiting for a meeting to start. Her coffee grew cold beside her as she stared at the screen. At first she didn't move, then her hand lifted slowly to cover her mouth as tears welled in her eyes, not just for what had been given, but for everything that had been let go. She stepped into an empty conference room and sat down, phone still in hand, her breath catching as she reread the last line. That was the last piece I needed to give away. Edith Monroe. The new training floor had been completed over the weekend, its glossy tiles still smelling faintly of varnish and sawdust. Rows of desks, each equipped with dual monitors and adjustable chairs, sat ready for the incoming wave of trainees, scheduled to arrive the following week. The whiteboard walls gleamed, the digital projector hummed softly on standby. There was a cleanliness to it all, not just in appearance, but in intent. Marcus stood by the wide double doors with Camille, holding a small box in one hand. Inside was the plaque they'd commissioned 2 weeks ago. Custom brass, hand-etched, simple, but meant to last. She's not going to want fanfare, Camille said as she adjusted the collar of her blazer. Good, Marcus replied. She's not getting any. Behind them, footsteps approached at a steady, unhurried pace. Jenna arrived first, wearing a dark green blouse and slacks, her badge clipped to her hip, a spiral notebook tucked under one arm. Edith followed close behind. She wasn't dressed formally, just a charcoal cardigan, slacks and her usual leather flats, but the way she carried herself filled the room before she even stepped through the threshold. Jenna smiled when she saw the covered wall bracket just beside the entrance to the training wing. You didn't, she said quietly, eyes moving from the plaque to Marcus, then to her mother. Edith stopped next to her, saying nothing yet, just looking. Her gaze swept over the clean floor, the gleaming screens, the chairs tucked in with precision. There was no trace left of the outdated furniture that had once filled this space, no echo of old training memos or dusty procedure manuals. Everything here had been rebuilt, reimagined. Camille opened the box and carefully removed the plaque, revealing the words in etched bronze: the Monroe Program, training the next generation of operations leadership, legacy is earned. She handed it to Marcus, who installed it gently into the bracket. With a soft click it locked into place. No ribbon, no speech, just the quiet affirmation of permanence. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Jenna, with a voice caught somewhere between pride and awe, said, "That's going to be there long after all of us are gone." Edith reached out slowly, ran her fingers across the edge of the metal, then tapped it once with her knuckle. Not a knock, not a test, a mark of completion. "It's not about me," she said after a pause. "It's about the people who come in here and realize they don't have to sound like everyone else in the room to be heard." Marcus nodded. "That's exactly why it's yours." She didn't reply. She didn't have to. They gave her the rest of the room to herself for a few minutes. Jenna lingered near the back before slipping away, her hand brushing lightly against her mother's shoulder on the way out. Edith walked slowly to the center of the space, her cane tapping rhythmically against the floor. She looked around, scanning the rows, the clean walls, the visible white space where ideas had yet to be written. For a brief second her mind conjured the room as it used to be, linoleum curling at the edges, old projectors that clicked more than they worked, people nodding through lectures they didn't believe in. But now, none of that remained. No traces, no names, especially not his. Troy's name had been quietly scrubbed from every old manual, every buried document, every group email archive. No memo had gone out, no redline notice posted. It was as if he had never been part of the company at all, and for the first time Edith felt no weight on her shoulder. No need to explain the silence he left behind. He hadn't been erased, he had simply faded as things do when they were never meant to last. She turned to leave, one hand brushing against the edge of the plaque again as she passed. The brass felt warm under her finger. The morning sun filtered through the Carolina pines in long dappled streaks, casting soft golden bars across the back porch. The wood beneath Edith's feet was warm from the rising heat, but the breeze still held the gentleness of spring's exit. Birds chirped lazily in the distance, and somewhere across the street, a lawn mower buzzed, just faint enough to be ignored. Edith sat in her usual chair, a thick cushioned rocker that had once belonged to Daniel. The edges were worn smooth from years of use, but the frame held firm. She balanced a thin envelope across her lap, already opened, the paper inside folded in thirds with care. She ran her fingers across the yellowing edges before opening it fully again. It was a payroll stub, dated July, the very first one she'd signed after being promoted to regional ops manager for Southeastern Rail and Freight. The numbers were modest. The authority it carried back then had felt enormous. She remembered staying late that night, going line by line through every name and amount, double-checking the figures even after finance had cleared them. She had signed it in blue ink, so her signature wouldn't get lost in the copy. She looked at it now not with nostalgia but with clarity. A screen door creaked open behind her. Jenna stepped onto the porch, barefoot, holding 2 mugs of tea. "Didn't think you'd be up already," she said, settling into the chair beside her. Edith smiled slightly. "I've always been up before the quiet starts making noise." Jenna handed her the tea. "Mint or chamomile, whichever one you didn't burn," Edith said dryly. Jenna chuckled. "Chamomile." They sat in silence for a few minutes. Not the kind of silence that needs to be filled, but the kind that lets itself stretch, companionable, unhurried. A cardinal landed on the porch railing in front of them, its feathers catching the light like red glass. Edith watched it for a moment before glancing at Jenna, who was cradling her cup in both hands, her gaze somewhere beyond the trees. "You know," Edith said quietly, "your father didn't build an empire, he built a system, a living thing, something with purpose, something that moved freight but also moved people. He treated janitors the same as dispatchers, never forgot a birthday, never missed a number." Jenna didn't say anything, but her head tilted slightly toward the sound of her mother's voice. I wasn't about to let someone like Troy turn that into a resume bullet, Edith continued. He thought he'd inherited something, but you don't inherit a name, you honor it. Jenna looked at her now, eyes damp but steady. You did more than honor it, you protected. No, Edith said. I reminded it who it belonged to. Another beat of quiet passed. Edith folded the old payroll stub again, carefully, and slid it back into its envelope. Then she reached for the leather file folder resting on the table between them. The tab was labeled, in clean block letters, Monroe Case. She opened it one last time. Inside were a handful of notes, a couple of HR documents, and a single printed email dated 3 weeks ago, the last message Troy had sent before being permanently locked out of the Bell and Horizon system. She looked it over for a few seconds, then closed the folder. The click of the metal clasp was soft but final. Across the front she affixed a new sticker, status closed. She leaned back in the rocker, letting her head rest against the cushion. Jenna's hand reached across and rested lightly on hers. They didn't need to say anything more. Everything had already been said, not in confrontation, but in correction. No tension, no roles to perform, just mother and daughter. The quiet that followed wasn't hollow, it was earned. The camera would hold on Edith's hand resting on the closed file. The edges are worn, the label clear. A wind stirs the corner of a porch curtain, but nothing inside the frame moves. A voiceover might come softly then, not wistful, not angry, just steady. He told me to get a job. Cut to black. Final line on screen, so I gave him a resignation.